Lieutenant Sarah Lawson stepped off the transport bus, her boots sinking slightly into the sandy earth of Marine Corps' recruit depot. The morning sun beat down mercilessly, casting long shadows across the training grounds, highlighting the rows of barracks, the obstacle courses, and the harsh, exacting landscape that would test her body and spirit over the coming weeks. Her uniform was crisp, her posture straight, yet the scars trailing across her arms and shoulders, remnants of a car accident that had nearly ended her life years earlier, drew eyes. She didn't try to hide. She had expected the stares. She had anticipated the whispers, the sideways glances, the silent judgments. She had trained for this day for months, physically and mentally, preparing herself for the grueling demands of boot camp. But nothing could entirely shield her from the first moments of human scrutiny. She felt it almost immediately, the subtle shift of attention as the recruits around her noticed the raised lines and faded pink patches on her skin. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to see. Others, braver or crueler, leaned closer in curiosity. And then there were those who simply laughed, a short, sharp laugh that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. Sarah tightened her fists inside her gloves, grounding herself. She refused to shrink back, refused to let her scars define her. Before she'd even begun. This was her life now, her new path, and she was determined to walk it on her own terms. The scars were not just physical. They were reminders of survival, resilience, and a promise she had made to herself and to her late mentor, Captain Mitchell, who had believed in her when no one else had. Recruit Lawson. Arced drill instructor, the voice cutting through, the chatter like a whip. Sarah snapped to attention, straightening her spine, her face calm despite the flurry of attention around her. The instructor was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face carved in permanent discipline. He surveyed the group of incoming recruits, eyes sharp, noticing everything, hesitation, fear, overconfidence. Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing her as if she were a puzzle to be solved, a test to be passed. The other recruits were less subtle. One of them, a lanky young man with a crooked grin, nudged his companion and pointed discreetly at Sarah's arm. "Check out. A battle wounds," he whispered loud enough for a few others to hear. Laughter rippled around the perimeter. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. Instead, she held their gaze for a fleeting moment, letting them see the determination in her eyes. They faltered, caught off guard by her unwavering composure. The drill instructor clapped his hands sharply, silencing the whispers. "Welcome to boot camp, Marines," he said. His voice carried authority, and every recruit straightened reflexively. "This is not a place for excuses, for weakness, or for hesitation. Here, we test your body, your mind, and your spirit. You will face challenges that will make you question your own strength. You will fall, you will fail, but you will rise. You will endure, and those of you who cannot will leave. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." The recruits responded in unison, their voices tentative, uneven, but growing stronger with the rhythm of repetition. Sarah's heart thumped in her chest. She had faced doubt before, from doctors, from well-meaning friends who cautioned her about the physical limitations her scars might impose. But here, the judgment was immediate, raw and unfiltered. There was no room for pity. There was no room for weakness. And she welcomed it. She wanted to test herself against the hardest standard, to measure herself against the finest institution of discipline in the United States. As the morning unfolded, Sarah was assigned to her barracks, where the room was a small, utilitarian space with rows of cots, lockers, and the faint smell of disinfectant and sweat. She unpacked her limited belongings meticulously, each movement precise. Around her, other recruits were doing the same, some quietly observing her, some whispering and pointing. She ignored them, focusing on the rhythm of preparation, folding uniforms, polishing boots, checking her equipment. Every motion was deliberate, every breath controlled. Later, the recruits gathered on the drill field for their first physical assessment. Sarah's pulse quickened as she observed the sprawling obstacle course, a lattice of ropes, bars, and walls that would challenge endurance, strength, and courage. The sun glinted off the metal, and the sand beneath their feet was already scorching. She felt the burn in her calves before the first sprint even began. Around her, the other recruits were tense, whispering nervously, sizing up each other. "First run," barked the instructor. "Move," Sarah surged forward, muscles straining, lungs burning. The course tested every fiber of her body, and yet she pushed through, ignoring the sting of old injuries and the weight of the stare she could feel on her back. At one point, a recruit stumbled beside her, glancing at her scars. "Watch yourself," he muttered, almost apologetically. She offered a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement that she was aware of the danger, but was not defined by a dot. By the time the first session ended, sweat drenched her uniform, and every muscle ached. Some recruits groaned, others collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air. Sarah stood tall, chest heaving, hair plastered to her forehead, feeling the fire of accomplishment flicker within her. She had not come here to be admired. She had come to prove something to herself. And in that first test, she had done just that. That evening, in the quiet of the barracks, Sarah sat on her cot, tracing the scars along her arms with her fingertips. Each line told a story of pain, recovery, and survival. Some recruits would never understand, she thought. Some would see only imperfection, weakness, or oddity. But she saw endurance, courage, and a promise kept. She closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her, not as a source of sorrow, but as fuel. Every scar was a reminder that she had already survived challenges that would have crushed others. Here, in boot camp, she would survive this too, and she would thrive. As darkness settled over the depot, Sarah listened to the quiet murmurs of her fellow recruits, the soft rustle of bunks, and the distant call of drill instructors making their rounds. Fear, doubt, and ridicule would greet her in the days ahead, she knew. But so would opportunity, growth, and triumph. In the mirror, she caught her reflection. Eyes sharp, jaw firm, posture unwavering. The scars were there, yes, visible and undeniable. But they were not the sum of her. They were the beginning of her story. Her mentor's words echoed in her mind. Strength isn't measured by how you look. It's measured by how you rise after every fall. Sarah Lawson had fallen before. She had endured. And now she would rise again, stronger than ever, prepared to face every jeer, every challenge, every test with the same unwavering resolve that had carried her this far. The night ended, and as the barracks lights dimmed, Sarah lay awake, mind racing with the possibilities of the days ahead. This was more than boot camp. This was proving that scars, visible or invisible, did not diminish her worth or her courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and undoubtedly, new ridicule. But Sarah Lawson had arrived, not as a victim, not as a curiosity, but as a Marine in the making, ready to face the world with every scar, every flaw, and every ounce of her unyielding spirit. And in that quiet moment, standing alone against the darkness, she made an unspoken vow. She would endure. She would thrive. She would earn respect, not pity. And when the day came, even the harshest critics would see her for who she truly was. A warrior, marked by life but unbroken, ready to stand tall against any storm. The morning sun rose again over the training grounds, burning off the thin layer of dew and illuminating the recruits as they lined up for another grueling day. Lieutenant Sarah Lawson tightened the straps on her pack and scanned the group, knowing that her scars had already become the subject of whispered commentary and stolen glances. She didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that acknowledgement was only half the battle. The other half was endurance, showing through action, not words, that she was capable of more than anyone expected. It didn't take long for the first jeers to reach her ears. A cluster of younger, fresh-faced Marines leaned against a fence, smirking and nudging each other in the direction of her arms. "Nice battle wounds, recruit," one of them called out with a mocking grin. "Did your mom forget to pack bandages?" Laughter erupted around the corner, carried across the sand, and echoed in Sarah's ears. Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she refused to respond. Instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and continued with her warm-up stretches, muscles tensing with determination. She could hear the laughter, the muttered jokes, the whispered comments that painted her as fragile or different. Her stomach churned, but she reminded herself of the stakes. This wasn't about popularity. It was about survival, resilience, and proving that scars on the skin or the soul did not define her. As the day progressed, the mockery grew more relentless. During drill exercises, a recruit deliberately bumped her shoulder, pretending it was accidental, and smirked as if she should feel intimidated. In the chow hall, some recruits whispered insults about her scars, careful to keep them just below the threshold of outright confrontation, as if they were testing her reaction. Every glance, every snide remark was a challenge. Sarah could have reacted with anger, but she had learned that power lies not in shouting back, but in demonstrating quiet strength through action. During obstacle course training, the situation became particularly tense. Sarah had been assigned to a team with a group of recruits who had made it their mission to ridicule her at every opportunity. As they approached the rope climb, one recruit, tall and gangly, leaned over and whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "Bet those scars are going to slow you down." Sarah's hands tightened around the rope, her knuckles white. She climbed with deliberate precision, muscles straining, breath sharp in her chest. Every pull upward, every foot planted against the wooden wall was a testament to her resilience. By the time she reached the top, she had left the whispers behind, though she could still feel the sting of judgment behind her. Later, during marksmanship training, a group of recruits sat in the shade, muttering and smirking at her form. "Maybe she can't even hold the rifle steady," one said. Sarah focused entirely on her breathing, aligning the sights and squeezing the trigger with unflinching calm. Each shot hit its mark. The whispers faltered. Some of the skeptics glanced at each other, unsure of how to respond. The subtle shift of perception, almost imperceptible, was exhilarating. Sarah allowed herself a brief internal smile. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a small crack in the wall of mockery that surrounded her. Despite her growing competence, the ridicule was never far behind. In the barracks that night, she could hear faint laughter as she moved quietly through the room to prepare her uniform. Some recruits had begun a habit of leaving notes with veiled insults, poking fun at her scars, or scribbling jokes about weakness in her locker. Sarah sat on her cot, opening her journal and writing down her thoughts, letting the pen absorb the anger and frustration that threatened to boil over. She refused to retaliate with cruelty. Instead, she focused on documenting her experience, recording strategies for improvement, and reflecting on the strength she was cultivating inside herself. The turning point of the day came unexpectedly. During a group drill, one recruit, emboldened by the chorus of snickers surrounding him, shoved Sarah in the chest, laughing as she stumbled forward. The sand beneath her feet shifted, and for a fleeting second, she considered letting herself fall, letting the humiliation take hold. But she didn't. She straightened, chest forward, and pushed back against the shove, not with aggression, but with quiet, deliberate authority. The other recruits froze, stunned by her reaction. She completed the drill with remarkable precision, her movements controlled, her posture unyielding. No words could convey the message that actions now did. She was not to be underestimated. Later, when the instructors reviewed the drill performance, they called out each recruit's strengths and weaknesses. When Sarah's turn came, the commanding officer paused, scanning the formation. "Recruit Lawson," he said, voice steady. "Outstanding performance under pressure. Maintain that focus, and you'll inspire those around you." His words, though brief, carried immense weight. Among the group, there were murmurs of surprise. Some recruits glanced at each other, their mockery faltering in the face of her obvious capability. For the first time, Sarah felt the possibility that ridicule could be transformed into respect, but she knew the journey would be long and relentless. That night, alone on her cot, Sarah traced the scars along her forearms. Each mark held a memory: the accident, the hospital, the countless hours of rehabilitation, the fear of never regaining her strength. She had carried those scars in silence for years, letting them be reminders of survival and resilience. Now they had become a target, a reason for others to doubt her. But she refused to let their judgment dictate her value. Every jeer, every whispered insult was fuel. Every glance of doubt or disbelief became a spark that ignited her determination to endure, to rise above, and to prove herself worthy not through apology, but through action. She thought of Captain Mitchell, her late mentor, who had once told her, "Scars are proof you lived. Let them remind you of your strength, not your weakness." Sarah held on to those words as tightly as she held her journal. The barracks were silent now, except for the distant hum of the night shift and then chorus. Occasional shuffle of a recruit returning late from inspection. Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection, acknowledging the fear and embarrassment that had surfaced during the day. She felt anger, yes, but also clarity. Ridicule was temporary. Courage, discipline, and resilience were enduring. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. Some recruits persisted with their jokes, some observers remained skeptical, and some quietly admired her resolve. Sarah's strategy was simple but effective. Never react to provocation. Let actions speak, and focus relentlessly on her own progress. She woke early, trained hard, and documented every detail of her journey. Her physical performance improved steadily. Her mental fortitude grew. Even when jeers and whispers followed her, she responded with silent determination, letting her actions gradually speak louder than their words. A pivotal moment occurred during an early morning endurance run. The group had been instructed to complete a 6-mile run across uneven terrain, carrying full packs. Halfway through, one of the recruits mocked her again, loudly commenting on the fragile scars that must make running difficult. Sarah's chest tightened, and for a split second, a surge of anger threatened to distract her. Then she remembered the countless hours of preparation, the pain she had endured, and the promise she had made to herself. She would not let anyone define her limits. She surged forward, passing the mocker with ease, finishing the course not only ahead of expectation, but also with dignity and composure. By the end of that week, Sarah began to notice subtle changes. Some of the Marines who had whispered the loudest were now quieter, observing her performance with something approaching respect. Others began offering nods of acknowledgement rather than laughter. The instructors, too, seemed to take note of her unwavering resolve. It was not immediate, and it was far from complete, but the first cracks in the wall of ridicule were forming. Sarah understood that true respect was earned, not given, and she welcomed the challenge. Lying on her cot that night, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The scars she carried had drawn attention, yes, and sometimes pain, but they had also become symbols of endurance, reminders that she had survived hardship and would continue to do so. She closed her journal, set her pen down, and stared at the ceiling, reflecting on the day's events. Each jeer, each moment of doubt, was transforming into motivation. She felt a quiet confidence, a steady assurance that she was exactly where she needed to be, facing exactly the challenges she was meant to overcome. The night ended not with fear, but with purpose. Sarah Lawson understood that the path ahead would be filled with more mockery, more challenges, and more moments that tested her resolve. But she also understood something more profound. Every act of ridicule could be met with endurance. Every doubt could be countered with courage. And every scar, visible or invisible, could become a testament to her strength. She had arrived at boot camp with scars that drew attention. She would leave having earned respect. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the journey had only just begun. The sun was still low on the horizon when Sarah Lawson laced up her boots and stepped onto the damp training field. The air smelled of sand, sweat, and the faint tang of metal from the nearby obstacle course. Today, the challenge would be more than physical. Sarah sensed it. Something had shifted in the barracks, in the eyes of the other recruits. The whispers had grown sharper, the laughter more pointed. It was subtle, but she could feel the tension, like electricity on the skin before a storm. Today, they would push her further than before. The drill instructor's whistle pierced the morning air. Formation. Move it, Marines. The recruits scrambled into position, some still sneering, others with nervous uncertainty, all aware that the day's exercises would test endurance, focus, and above all, mental strength. Sarah planted her boots firmly into the sand, scanning her surroundings. She could feel the eyes of the mockers on her back, the subtle shifts in posture, and the smirks that implied, "We'll see how far she can go." The first challenge was the obstacle course, designed to test both agility and determination. Sarah had completed similar exercises before, but today's course felt different, heavier somehow, as if every rope, every wall, and every balance beam carried the weight of scrutiny. Halfway through, the gangly recruit who had been the most vocal in mocking her nudged her deliberately as she prepared to climb a cargo net. "Watch your step, battle scar girl," he sneered. The laughter that followed stung sharply, but Sarah's pulse remained steady. She gritted her teeth, inhaled deeply, and planted her hands firmly on the ropes. The climb was grueling. Her muscles burned, sweat ran into her eyes, and her fingers threatened to slip. But she moved with precision and focus, ignoring the jeers echoing behind her. At the top, she paused, breathing hard, and glanced down at the group below. Their expressions shifted, from amusement to uncertainty. Sarah allowed herself a fleeting smile. This was the first real confrontation, not physical, but mental. She was showing them that mockery could not unseat determination. Next came the endurance run, a grueling circuit that stretched over several miles of uneven terrain, hills, and mud pits. The group surged forward, some struggling, some laughing. Behind their hands, at the battle-scarred recruit, one particularly brazen Marine jogged alongside her briefly, speaking just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Hope those scars don't slow you down, Lawson." Sarah didn't reply. Instead, she let her legs and lungs do the talking. Step by step, she pushed forward, muscles straining, heart pounding, yet her focus never wavered. As the course continued, the same Marine began to fall behind, his earlier confidence dissolving into fatigue. Sarah's quiet perseverance was a statement, more potent than any argument she could have made. By the end of the run, she crossed the finish line with a steadiness that left even the mocking Marines stunned, while others quietly nodded in acknowledgement. But the real confrontation came during the final drill of the day, a team-based tactical exercise. Each group of recruits was assigned a simulated mission requiring coordination, communication, and physical exertion. Sarah's team was tasked with carrying supplies across uneven terrain, over walls, and through mud pits, all while maintaining formation. The same recruits who had mocked her throughout the week began murmuring, questioning her ability to contribute. Midway through the exercise, disaster struck. One of the recruits tripped over a hidden root and fell hard, scraping his arm on the chi. Rocks beneath. Panic rippled through the group. They hesitated, unsure whether to continue, but Sarah sprang into action. Without hesitation, she lifted the recruit carefully, assessing his injuries, and guided him back to the path. "Keep moving," she barked, her voice steady, commanding respect through authority rather than volume. The group followed her lead. Step by step, obstacle by obstacle, she guided them with a mixture of precision and encouragement. Her commands were concise, confident, and assertive. The other recruits began to notice the shift. The battle-scarred recruit they had mocked was now leading with competence, clarity, and courage. Whispers turned into attentive glances. Smirks transformed into nods of acknowledgement. By the end of the exercise, the team had completed the course not only successfully, but with remarkable cohesion. The drill instructor surveyed the group, his eyes scanning the formation before landing. "On Sarah. Lawson," he said, voice calm but firm. "Excellent leadership under pressure. You demonstrated initiative, control, and courage. Keep this up, and you'll set the standard for others." The acknowledgement reverberated through the group. Some of the Marines who had previously ridiculed her averted their eyes, caught off guard by her competence. Others looked at her with tentative respect, unsure how to reconcile the image they had created with the reality standing before them. Sarah felt a surge of quiet triumph, a confirmation that endurance, courage, and composure could speak louder than words, louder than ridicule, louder than fear. That evening, back in the barracks, Sarah sat on her cot, reviewing the day's events. In her journal, she recounted every detail, the mockery, the pushes, the whispered doubts, and her own reactions. She wrote of the moment she lifted the fallen recruit, of her determination to maintain composure, and of the subtle shift she had seen in her peers' attitudes. Writing, she realized, was as much a method of reflection as it was a tool for strategy. Each word captured a lesson. Each sentence reinforced resilience. Sleep came fitfully. She lay awake, thinking about the confrontation, replaying every interaction. The echoes of laughter still lingered in her mind, yet they no longer held the same power. The day had proven something essential. Mockery could provoke, but it could not define her. Strength, courage, and focus, these were hers to command. The confrontation had been necessary, not only to assert her capability, but to plant the seeds of change in those around her. By the next morning, Sarah felt the subtle but unmistakable shift. The group dynamic had altered, even if only slightly. The overt teasing had diminished, replaced by a watchful curiosity. Some recruits observed her in silence, analyzing her actions rather than judging her appearance. The gangly Marine who had mocked her most persistently avoided direct remarks, seemingly unsure how to respond. Respect, albeit tentative and cautious, was beginning to emerge from the shadows of ridicule. In the training field, Sarah pushed herself harder than ever. Each obstacle, each drill, each endurance test became a demonstration, not of physical strength alone, but of mental fortitude. She ran faster, climbed higher, and executed every command with precision, knowing that the eyes of both her peers and instructors were on her. The scars that had once drawn mockery now bore witness to her resolve. Every pull-up, every sprint, every measured breath was a silent testament to the resilience she had cultivated over years of struggle. A few of the more perceptive recruits began to approach her quietly, asking for advice on techniques, strategies for drills, and tips for endurance. At first, she was surprised. They were the same Marines who had mocked her, who had whispered and laughed, yet the dynamic had shifted. Sarah offered guidance, measured and patient, sharing knowledge and demonstrating leadership without arrogance. Slowly, the whispers of mockery were replaced with questions, collaboration, and the beginnings of trust. Sarah understood that the confrontation had been both external and internal. Externally, she had faced ridicule and skepticism from her peers. Internally, she had confronted fear, doubt, and the temptation to retreat. Each challenge, each push against judgment, had strengthened her resolve. She realized that confrontation was not about aggression or proving others wrong. It was about standing firmly in her own truth, letting actions speak louder than words. By the end of the week, the transformation was evident. While not all recruits had changed their perception, the group had begun to recognize her capability, determination, and courage. The first cracks in the wall of mockery had appeared. Sarah's scars were still visible, but they no longer invited judgment. Instead, they symbolized survival, endurance, and the promise of continued strength. Her journey was far from complete, but the confrontation had shifted the trajectory. Respect, though fragile, was now possible. That night, Sarah wrote one final note in her journal before closing it. Today was not just about physical endurance. It was about proving to myself that ridicule cannot break me. My scars are my strength. My actions define me, not their words. I will rise, again and again, until no one doubts the power of perseverance. She set the journal aside, muscles aching but spirit unbroken, and finally allowed herself to rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more tests, and inevitably more scrutiny. But Sarah Lawson had faced confrontation, both external and internal, and had emerged stronger, more focused, and resolute. In the darkness of the barracks, as other recruits slept fitfully, Sarah closed her eyes with a sense of quiet victory. She had survived the day, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. She had confronted ridicule and emerged with dignity. The journey ahead would be long, arduous, and filled with obstacles, but she was ready. She had discovered the power of her own resilience, the strength embedded in her scars, and the quiet authority that comes from rising above judgment. And in that quiet moment, Sarah Lawson made another unspoken vow. The confrontation was only the beginning. Every jeer, every challenge, every doubt would now meet the unwavering determination that had brought her this far. She would endure. She would persevere. And eventually, she would earn the respect of everyone around her, not because of her scars, but because of her courage, her leadership, and her unbreakable spirit. The following week at boot camp dawned with a crisp chill. The early morning air carrying the faint scent of sand and metal across the training grounds. Sarah Lawson rose with the sun, her boots crunching softly against the dew-soaked earth as she made her way to the obstacle course. Each day brought a new set of challenges, and each day offered an opportunity to transform ridicule into respect. The scars that had once drawn laughter now served as constant reminders of her resilience, her determination, and the strength she carried beneath the surface. The early morning drills began with rigorous calisthenics, the recruits moving in near-perfect synchronization under the watchful eye of the drill instructors. Sarah's muscles ached from the previous week's exertion as she pushed herself relentlessly, mindful that endurance was more than physical. It was mental, emotional, and moral. Every push-up, every sit-up, every sprint was a deliberate act of defiance against the whispers and laughter that had once surrounded her. With each repetition, she fortified her spirit and silently challenged those who had doubted her to reconsider their judgments. Soon after, the recruits were paired for marksmanship drills. Sarah's partner, initially skeptical, glanced at her with thinly veiled curiosity rather than derision. She demonstrated the proper stance, alignment, and breathing techniques with careful precision. Each shot hit its target, sharp and deliberate. Her partner, impressed despite himself, nodded silently. A subtle shift had begun. Her competence was undeniable, her focus unwavering, and her leadership potential evident. The mockery, once a constant undercurrent, now found itself increasingly powerless against the evidence of her skill. Midway through the day, a surprise endurance challenge was announced. The recruits were tasked with navigating a grueling course that combined climbing, crawling, and running through uneven terrain. As they reached a particularly treacherous mud pit, a younger recruit stumbled and fell, unable to free himself from the suction of the mud. Panic flashed in the eyes of those nearby. Some hesitated, unsure whether to help, while others laughed nervously. Without hesitation, Sarah plunged forward, extending her hands to the struggling recruit. She carefully maneuvered him free, using her strength and presence of mind to ensure that neither of them was injured further. "Stay calm," she instructed, her voice steady and commanding. The other recruits watched, astonished. The gangly Marine who had mocked her most persistently the previous week stood frozen, his smirk replaced with a wary, uncertain look. Here was the same recruit they had ridiculed, demonstrating courage and leadership when it mattered most. By the time they completed the course, Sarah's team had not only finished, but had done so with remarkable cohesion. The drill instructors paused, eyes scanning the group before landing on Sarah. "Lawson," the senior instructor said, voice firm but approving, "you demonstrated initiative, leadership, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Continue this standard, and you'll set the example for your peers." The other recruits exchanged glances, some nodding quietly, others begrudgingly impressed. Later in the afternoon, a tactical simulation tested their problem-solving and teamwork skills. Sarah's unit was assigned a series of strategic objectives requiring careful coordination, communication, and decision-making. Throughout the exercise, Sarah's composure became evident. She delegated tasks efficiently, corrected errors without harshness, and maintained a steady, encouraging presence. The recruits who had mocked her were now following her lead, their confidence in her abilities growing with each successful maneuver. Even subtle gestures, a nod, a quick acknowledgement of an instruction, conveyed a growing respect for the quiet authority she wielded. During a break, one of the more skeptical recruits approached her cautiously. "Hey, Lawson," he said, avoiding direct eye contact at first. I wanted to say thanks for earlier. I didn't think you'd manage the mud pit so efficiently. I guess I misjudged you." Sarah blinked, momentarily surprised, then allowed herself a small, sincere smile. "Thanks," she replied, keeping her tone modest. "We all have to look out for each other here. That's the only way we get through." The words were simple, but the meaning profound. This acknowledgement marked one of the first tangible victories, not over others, but over doubt, both theirs and hers. By the end of the day, Sarah had begun to notice other subtle shifts. Some recruits were quieter in their observations, opting to watch her performance rather than mock her appearance. Others had begun to ask for guidance, tips on obstacle navigation, strategies for endurance, or advice on maintaining focus under stress. Each inquiry, though small, was a victory, a recognition that her expertise and determination were valued, and that her scars, while visible, were no longer a barrier to credibility. That evening, back in the barracks, Sarah sat on her cot, journal in hand, reflecting on the day's events. She wrote carefully, capturing not only the physical details, but the emotional and social dynamics at play. She documented moments of triumph, lifting the recruit from the mud pit, guiding her team through the tactical simulation, earning nods of acknowledgement from those who had once laughed at her. Writing allowed her to internalize her victories, to recognize that progress was happening in incremental, meaningful ways. Sleep came easier that night, her body exhausted, but her mind alive with reflection. Sarah understood that the path to respect and acceptance was gradual. It was not enough to succeed once. She needed to demonstrate consistency, resilience, and integrity over time. Yet she also understood something vital. The small victories mattered. Each nod, each word of acknowledgement, each subtle shift in perception was a building block, forming the foundation for greater accomplishments to come in the following days. Sarah's routine became a cycle of relentless preparation, careful observation, and quiet leadership. She continued to excel in physical drills, marksmanship, and tactical exercises. But she also began paying attention to her peers' needs, offering support where necessary and guidance when requested. Her actions created ripples that extended beyond herself, slowly altering the dynamics within the barracks. Where there had once been ridicule, there was now tentative trust. Where there had been doubt, there was growing confidence. A defining moment occurred during an evening exercise designed to test endurance and problem-solving under stress. The recruits were tasked with navigating a darkened obstacle course, carrying weighted packs, relying on limited communication and intuition. At one point, a team member became disoriented, panicked, and froze. Sarah's voice cut through the tension, calm and commanding. "Focus on your breathing. Take my hand, step by step." Her guidance brought the recruit back into the flow, allowing the team to continue and complete the exercise successfully. Her ability to maintain composure under pressure reinforced her leadership credibility, and even the harshest skeptics began to acknowledge her presence with quiet respect. By the end of the week, Sarah's reputation had subtly shifted. The same Marines who had mocked her the most were now observing her with curiosity, some even attempting to emulate her precision and focus. Others began to include her in group discussions and exercises, seeking input rather than derision. It was not complete acceptance, not yet, but it was undeniable progress. Every small victory, a nod, a question, a moment of collaboration, represented the first bricks in a wall of respect, one that Sarah was steadily constructing through persistence, courage, and integrity. That night, Sarah sat on her cot. Once more, journal open, writing the final entry of the day. Small victories matter. They are the quiet victories that build strength, character, and respect. Today, action spoke louder than words. I have started to shift perception, and I will continue. Each step, each command, each act of composure brings me closer to proving, not just to them, but to myself, that scars are not weaknesses. They are markers of resilience, endurance, and the promise of strength yet to be proven. As the barracks lights dimmed and recruits settled into sleep, Sarah reflected on the significance of the day. She had not only survived another set of trials, but had begun to transform the environment around her. The ridicule, once sharp and pervasive, had lost some of its potency. Small victories, she realized, were not just personal milestones. They were catalysts for change, subtle yet powerful shifts that would lay the groundwork for larger triumphs in the days to come. Sarah Lawson closed her journal and leaned back on her cot, muscles aching but mind alert. The journey ahead was still filled with challenges, mockery, and moments that would test her resolve. But the small victories of today had fortified her spirit. Each nod, each acknowledgement, each successful exercise reminded her that endurance, courage, and integrity could gradually turn skepticism into respect. And in the quiet of the barracks, surrounded by the soft murmurs of sleeping recruits, Sarah felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. She had begun to transform her environment through action, leadership, and quiet determination. The path ahead remained long and demanding, but she knew with certainty that she was moving in the right direction. The small victories of today would serve as the foundation for the greater triumphs that awaited her, not just for herself, but for the respect and recognition she was beginning to earn from those around her. The chill of dawn wrapped around the training grounds, sharper than usual, carrying an air of anticipation. The recruits stirred in the barracks, sensing that today would be different. Whispered rumors had spread all week. The instructors were preparing something grueling, something designed to strip away every ounce of pride, fatigue, and hesitation. For Sarah Lawson, it was another step in the journey, another trial she had already vowed to face head-on. The announcement came swiftly at formation. "Today you face the crucible," arced the senior instructor, his voice booming across the yell. "Field, 54 hours, no sleep, minimal food. You will march, you will fight, you will bleed. You will either emerge as Marines, or you will not emerge at all. The crucible, the final, ultimate test." Every recruit knew its reputation. Brutal, unforgiving, designed to push the human body and mind to the brink of collapse. Sarah tightened her fists, her pulse steady. She had endured ridicule, carried scars, and faced doubt from every corner. This was not just a test of survival. For her, it was the moment to silence laughter with action, to carve respect into the bedrock of her unit's memory. The first phase began with a 20-mile march under full packs. The recruits moved in staggered formation, boots thudding in rhythm, rifles slung tight. The straps cut into Sarah's shoulders, the weight dragging on her frame, but she kept her posture steady. Around her, whispers rose and fell, jokes muttered, curses spat against the burden of the packs. Yet she pushed forward, her scars glistening with sweat beneath the rising sun. By midday, exhaustion had begun to seep into the group. One recruit stumbled, falling hard against the dirt path. The unit slowed, eyes shifting to the instructors. But before orders could be barked, Sarah was already at the fallen recruit's side, hauling his pack off his shoulders and helping him to his feet. "You've got this," she urged, her voice calm but firm. One step at a time. Together, they rejoined the line. That small act of leadership was noted by more than one set of eyes. The same Marines who once smirked at her scars now followed her example, quietly lending a hand when others faltered. Step by step, she was shifting what it meant to lead. As dusk descended, the next phase of the crucible arrived, the combat simulations. The recruits were divided into squads, tasked with carrying out missions under simulated battlefield conditions. Ammunition was replaced with blanks, but the chaos was real. Explosions echoed from training charges, smoke hung heavy in the air, and instructors shouted conflicting orders to heighten the disorientation. Sarah's squad stumbled early, thrown into disarray, when one recruit panicked and dropped his rifle. The noise of the mock firefight grew deafening. Sarah took charge instantly, her voice cutting through the clamor. "Fall on me. Cover the left. Watch the ridge." She moved decisively, positioning herself where the danger was heaviest, drawing attention so her teammates could regroup. By the time the mission ended, their squad had completed the objective faster than the others. The instructor overseeing them offered no compliment, just a curt nod, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. More importantly, Sarah's squadmates glanced at her differently now. Not as the scarred Marine they had mocked, but as the steady voice that had kept them alive in the storm. The second night brought exhaustion deeper than known. The recruits were given only brief moments to rest, chewing on rations as they huddled against the chill. Sarah silently back against her pack, eyes scanning the horizon. A younger Marine leaned closer, whispering, "Lawson, how do you keep going? I'm falling apart here." Sarah's gaze softened. "You don't think about the whole thing. You think about the next step, the next hill, the next order. If you can do one thing right now, you can do another after that." The Marine nodded, taking strength from her words. For the first time, Sarah realized her scars were no longer symbols of weakness in their eyes. They had become proof that she had suffered before and still endured, and that maybe they could too. The second day blurred into punishing climbs, relentless drills, and endless miles under the burden of gear. Sarah's legs burned, her shoulders screamed, and fatigue gnawed at her resolve. Yet every time her body begged her to stop, she saw the faces of those who once laughed at her, now depending on her to keep moving. That thought fueled her legs, steadied her voice, and carried her forward. By the final night, the recruits were shadows of themselves. Hollow-eyed, lips cracked from thirst, limbs heavy with exhaustion. They stumbled through the last obstacle. Course, a gauntlet of mud pits, barbed wire, and towering walls. Each movement a war against gravity. At the mud crawl, one recruit collapsed, unable to drag himself beneath the wire. The instructors shouted for the unit to keep moving, but Sarah stopped. She dropped beside him, slinging his arm over her shoulder. "We finished together," she said simply. With grit and determination, she dragged him forward, inch by inch, until they emerged on the other side. Her body screamed in protest, her scars burning as mud caked into every line of healed tissue. But she refused to let go. Step after grueling step, she pushed forward, the weight of two people slowing her but never breaking her. Around her, the recruits no longer sneered. They rallied, lending hands, pulling ropes, lifting each other over walls. What began as ridicule had transformed into unity, sparked by her refusal to abandon anyone. At dawn on the third day, the crucible ended. The recruits gathered, battered, filthy, trembling with exhaustion. The general overseeing the final ceremony approached, his presence commanding silence. He moved slowly down the line, his gaze sharp, unreadable. When he stopped before Sarah, the entire unit tensed. He said nothing at first. His eyes lingered on the scars across her arms, her neck, the visible reminders of her past battles. But instead of disdain, there was something else, recognition, silent awe, the kind a soldier reserves for another who has already fought wars, internal and external, and refused to break. He extended a hand, pressing the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem into her palm, the symbol that marked her transformation from recruit to Marine. The weight of it in her hand was heavier than any pack she had carried, more powerful than any insult she had endured. Around her, the recruits who had once jeered now stood straighter, their eyes fixed on her not with mockery, but respect. They had seen her courage, her endurance, her refusal to abandon them. In the silence that followed, the general's gesture said more than words ever could. Scars were not flaws. They were the mark of survival, the proof of strength. For Sarah Lawson, the crucible had not only forged her into a Marine, it had forged a bond with those around her, transforming ridicule into reverence, laughter into loyalty. She had passed the ultimate test, not just of endurance, but of character. And as the sun rose on that final morning, she knew this was only the beginning of a larger journey, one that her scars would guide her through with unshakable strength. The days following the crucible carried a silence unlike anything the recruits had experienced before. It was not the silence of exhaustion, nor the pause after orders. It was the silence of respect. Every Marine in training had witnessed the transformation in themselves, but none more so than in Sarah Lawson. Where once there had been whispers of ridicule, now there were nods of acknowledgement. Where once her scars had drawn smirks, they now drew quiet reverence. Yet Sarah felt no triumph. The emblem pressed into her hand by the general was a reminder that her journey was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving herself. Right, the training cycle shifted to advanced drills, where recruits learned teamwork beyond physical endurance, navigation under pressure, squad tactics and live fire simulations, and high-stakes problem-solving exercises. Unlike before, Sarah no longer stood alone. She found herself at the center of her squad, their eyes instinctively turning to her for guidance when chaos erupted. One afternoon, during a navigation drill in dense forest, her squad faltered. The map was soaked from sudden rain, the compass needles spinning wildly from a magnetic anomaly. Tension built quickly as voices rose in disagreement. Sarah let the frustration play out before lifting her voice. Calm but certain. "Arguing won't get us out of here," she said. She held the map flat against her knee, shielding it from the rain. "Landmarks don't lie. Look around. We passed a ridge line 2 clicks back. If we circle northeast, we'll find it again and reorient." Her reasoning cut through the noise. The squad followed her lead, and within an hour, they were back on track. By the time they reached the checkpoint, even the most skeptical among them had fallen quiet, exchanging glances that carried an unspoken truth. She had earned their trust, but trust was not built on competence alone. It grew in the small moments, the ones between drills and missions. Sarah shared her rations when others went hungry. She offered to clean rifles for those too blistered to move their hands. At night, when exhaustion made tempers flare, she diffused arguments with steady words. Slowly, the recruits who once mocked her scars began to sit beside her willingly. Asking about her story. At first, Sarah resisted. The wounds of her past were not tales she enjoyed recounting. But one evening, under the stars, she found herself speaking. She told them of the accident, the fire that had nearly claimed her life years before, the skin grafts, the endless surgeries, the stares in grocery stores, the pitying glances that cut deeper than any blade. "I came here," she admitted softly, "because I didn't want my scars to be the only story people saw. I wanted to write a new one." Silence followed, but it was no longer the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of connection. The young Marine beside her, the one who had once joined in jeering laughter, reached out and clasped her wrist. Gently. "You already have," he said. From then on, her scars were no longer a topic of mockery. They were anchors of resilience, woven into the fabric of her squad's identity. When fatigue struck, someone would mutter, "If Lawson can push through with everything she's carried, so can we." It became a rallying cry, a bond stronger than the steel of their rifles. Weeks rolled into months, and the unit advanced to live fire exercises, the closest they had come to true combat. The crack of rifles echoed across ranges, grenades thundered, and smoke hung low in the air. Mistakes here were not corrected with scolding, but with danger. A misstep could cost more than pride. During one such drill, chaos erupted when a recruit froze in the open, bullets tearing across the range in simulation. Panic rippled through the squad. Without hesitation, Sarah broke cover, sprinting across the open field. Shouts followed her, warnings, curses, but she dove, dragging the paralyzed Marine back behind the barricade. "You're alive because you move when you have to," she snapped, shaking him until his eyes focused. "You don't freeze. Not here, not ever." Her voice carried the weight of survival, not cruelty. The Marine nodded, trembling but alive. The instructors observed silently, their notes shifting. Leadership was no longer a question mark beside her name. It was underlined. The bonds forged during those drills extended beyond duty. In stolen moments of rest, the squad laughed together, shared stories, teased one another like siblings. When one Marine received bad news from home, Sarah sat with him through the night, saying little but offering presence. When another doubted her place in the Corps, Sarah reminded her of the miles she had already conquered. For Sarah, these bonds became her lifeline as much as hers to them. She no longer carried her scars alone. They had become part of a larger whole, a tapestry of shared struggle and earned trust. The final test of these bonds came unexpectedly. During a nighttime field exercise, the squad was tasked with capturing a fortified position. The scenario was meant to simulate combat chaos, with flares streaking the sky and explosions rumbling in the distance. Midway through the mission, one Marine tripped and twisted his ankle badly. The squad hesitated, caught between completing the mission and helping their injured comrade. The old squad might have left him, but not this one. Not now. Sarah knelt, examining the injury. "He's not walking on that," she said firmly. "We'll carry him." The decision cost them precious time, but no one argued. Two Marines lifted the injured recruit, while Sarah reorganized their formation, taking point. They moved slower, but they moved together. By the time they reached the objective, they were late, but intact. The instructors scolded their timing, but did not miss the deeper lesson. They had acted as Marines, not as individuals. Later, as they sat catching their breath, the injured Marine turned to Sarah. "You could have left me. Others would have. Why didn't you?" She looked at him, her voice steady. "Because scars aren't always on the skin. They're what you carry when you're left behind. And I'll never leave anyone to carry that alone." The words lingered in the squad's minds long after. From that moment, Sarah's place among them was not just accepted, it was cemented. She was not simply a Marine in training. She was their Marine, their anchor, the one who had carried them through storms, both physical and unseen. The bonds forged in fire had transformed them. They were no longer a group of individuals chasing the title of Marine. They were a family, tied not by blood, but by grit, sweat, scars, and loyalty. And in that bond, Sarah found something she had never expected, a home dot as graduation loomed. The squad marched together, steps aligned, heads high. The general's words from the crucible still echoed in Sarah's mind, but now they were joined by the voices of those who had once doubted her. Their respect was no longer silent awe. It was living, breathing camaraderie, the kind forged only in fire. Sarah Lawson had come to prove her worth. Instead, she had built a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a family that carried one another beyond doubt, beyond scars, and into the unbreakable fabric of the Marine Corps. Graduation from basic training was not merely a ceremony. It was a transformation. The recruits, once stumbling and unsure, now marched in unison. Boots struck the ground with precision. Rifles gleamed under the sun, and the air carried an electricity born of struggle and triumph. Families filled the bleachers, waving flags and snapping pictures. But the recruits' eyes stayed forward, fixed on the horizon of a new beginning. Among them stood Sarah Lawson. Her uniform was crisp, her chin high, her scars visible against. As sunlight, unhidden, unapologetic. She had marched this far, not to erase them, but to embrace them. As she stood among her brothers and sisters, there was no trace of ridicule, no whisper of mockery. Only unity. The general, the same man who had pressed the emblem into her hand during the crucible, strode across the field. His eyes scanned the ranks, pausing briefly when they fell on Sarah. He gave no smile, no nod, but his silence carried the same weight as it had before. That silence had changed her life, and now it echoed again. After the ceremony, Sarah expected life to settle into a rhythm. She would advance to her specialty training, shoulder her duties, and blend into the vast sea of Marines. But word had already traveled beyond her unit. Stories of the scarred recruit who had defied doubt, carried her squad, and earned silent awe from a general had begun circulating. Marines from other units asked about her. Instructors from other battalions knew her name before she introduced herself. Recognition had come quietly, but it grew louder each day. During her specialty training in communications, Sarah quickly excelled. She absorbed technical knowledge faster than most, But what set her apart was not simply skill. It was the way she elevated those around her. When recruits struggled with radio protocols, she stayed late to walk them through. When equipment malfunctioned, she volunteered to troubleshoot. Even if it wasn't her responsibility, one instructor pulled her aside after a long day. "Lawson, I've seen Marines twice your age quit when things get hard. Like you." He studied her face, his voice softening. "You don't just endure hardship, you transform it into fuel." The words humbled her, yet they also unsettled her. She hadn't come seeking attention or accolades. She had come to prove she could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone else. But the attention kept growing. One afternoon, while cleaning radios, in the Combs Bay, she overheard a pair of recruits whispering. "That's her," one said. The one the general stood silent for. "Lawson, you know about her scars, right? They say she dragged someone under live fire like it was nothing." Sarah paused, her hands tightening around the cloth. The story had grown, exaggerated into myth. She wondered if her reality, the sweat, the pain, the nights of doubt, was being lost in the legend. Later, she confided in her squad mate from boot camp, Corporal Jenkins, who had grown into one of her closest friends. "I didn't ask for this," she admitted quietly. "I just wanted to be a Marine. Now it feels like I'm becoming a symbol, and I don't know if I'm ready for that." Jenkins chuckled softly. "That's the thing about symbols, Lawson. You don't choose them, they choose you. And maybe the Corps needs someone like you right now." His words stayed with her. Recognition reached higher levels when Sarah's unit was invited to participate in a multi-branch training exercise involving Marines, Army soldiers, and Air Force personnel. The event was designed to test interbranch cooperation, but unofficially, it was also a stage where leaders kept an eye on rising talent. During one exercise, her joint squad faced a communications blackout in the middle of a mock operation. Radios crackled uselessly, leaving teams disoriented. Panic spread quickly as time-sensitive objectives slipped away. Sarah dove into the mess of wires and equipment, working with a speed that stunned the others. Within minutes, she rerouted the system and restored partial comms, enough to re-establish contact and coordinate a regroup. The Army lieutenant leading the operation turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Where did you learn to improvise like that?" Sarah simply shrugged. "Necessity has always been my best teacher." The lieutenant grinned. "Well, necessity just saved our mission." Her actions were noted in after-action reports, her name highlighted in multiple evaluations. Soon after, a visiting colonel requested to speak with her. Sitting across from him in a modest office, Sarah braced herself for formality, but the colonel leaned forward with a directness that disarmed her. "Lawson," he said, "I've read your reports. I've heard about your reputation. You should. No, you're not just another Marine anymore. You're someone others look to. Do you understand what that means?" She hesitated. "It means I can't fail." "No," the colonel corrected gently. "It means you'll inspire others, even when you feel like you're failing. That's heavier than any pack you'll carry." The weight of his words settled deep within her in the weeks that followed. Sarah began to sense the shift everywhere she went. Younger Marines approached her with questions, not just about training, but about perseverance. "How did you keep going when people doubted you?" they asked. "How do you keep walking with scars that everyone can see?" She answered honestly, "Because I decided my scars were not my ending. They're my beginning." Her openness resonated. Marines began repeating her words, passing them along like a mantra. But recognition brought new challenges too. Some peers resented the attention she received, muttering that she was being glorified for something beyond her control. One Marine confronted her directly in the mess hall. "You think you're some kind of hero because you've got scars? We all suffer. You're not special." The words stung, But Sarah met his gaze steadily. "You're right. I'm not special because of my scars. I'm a Marine because I never let them stop me. And neither should you." The Marine fell silent, his anger crumbling into reflection. Sarah didn't win everyone's approval, but she didn't need to. What mattered was that she stayed true to the reason she had joined, to prove her worth through action, not perception. That the recognition beyond the ranks culminated one afternoon when she was unexpectedly summoned back to base headquarters. There, waiting for her, was the same general who had once stood in silent awe. He studied her as though measuring not just her posture, but the strength of the person she had become. "Lawson," he said, "when I first saw you, I wondered if your scars would break you or forge you. Now I see they've done both, and neither. They've revealed you." Sarah stood at attention, heart pounding. The general continued, his voice low but firm. "The Corps needs Marines who lead not just with skill, but with heart. You've done that. And you've done it without asking for recognition. That is why you've earned it." For the first time since she began her journey, Sarah allowed herself to feel pride, not for being noticed, but for being seen as she truly was. As she left headquarters, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parade deck. She knew her journey was far from over. Recognition had lifted her beyond the ranks, but it also carried new responsibility. She was no longer just Sarah Lawson, the scarred recruit. She was a Marine whose story carried the weight of many, and she would bear it with the same resilience that had brought her this far. Years had passed since Sarah Lawson first marched across the parade deck as a recruit. Time had added new medals to her chest and new experiences to her heart. Yet her scars remained unchanged, etched on her skin like permanent reminders of where her journey began. Some thought they defined her. Sarah knew better. They had never been the whole story, only the first page. Her career unfolded with the steady resilience that had carried her through boot camp. She deployed overseas twice, serving in demanding environments where her communication skills often became the backbone of operations. In deserts scorched by relentless heat, on ships rocking in hostile seas, and in makeshift bases where the line between safety and chaos blurred daily, Sarah proved her worth time and again. But what made her presence unforgettable wasn't just technical expertise. It was the way she carried herself when others faltered. When junior Marines hesitated under pressure, Sarah reminded them they were stronger than they believed. When fear whispered in quiet moments, she met it with calm determination. Her scars, once mocked, now became a silent testament that pain could be endured and turned into strength. Recognition grew beyond her units, beyond her bases. Articles appeared in Marine publications about the sergeant who refused to hide. Speeches at leadership conferences included her name as an example of grit and resilience. Even civilians began to hear her story, shared in whispers across families of Marines, told in classrooms where young recruits prepared to take the oath. Sarah never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight found her. One spring morning, she was invited to speak at a Marine Corps graduation ceremony, not as a recruit, but as a decorated non-commissioned officer. Standing before rows of wide-eyed graduates, Sarah's voice carried across the field. "When I stood where you are, I carried scars that others thought would hold me back. I was jeered, doubted, and even pitied. But I stand here now to tell you this. The things you believe make you weak can be the very things that make you unstoppable. You don't have to erase your scars. You have to embrace them." The recruits listened with rapt attention, some blinking back tears. Sarah saw herself reflected in their faces. The doubt, the hunger, the fire. In that moment, she realized her scars no longer belonged to her alone. They belonged to every Marine who would ever need proof that imperfection was not defeat. Her words traveled further than she imagined. A recording of her speech circulated online, reaching Marines across the globe. Veterans wrote to her, sharing how her courage gave them strength. Parents of young recruits sent letters, thanking her for showing their children what resilience looked like in flesh and blood. And yet, Sarah remained grounded. When praised, she redirected the spotlight to her team. When honored, she reminded others that leadership was not about one person's story, but about lifting many. She never let recognition eclipse humility. The pinnacle came years later when Sarah was unexpectedly called back to Marine Corps headquarters. She entered the same grand hall where she had once stood, trembling as a recruit receiving her emblem. But now she was no recruit. She was a seasoned Marine, scars visible, shoulders squared, eyes unflinching. A general, older now, rose to address her. He was the same one who had once stood in silent awe during her training, the man whose silence had changed her life. His hair was grayer, his medals heavier, but his presence carried the same weight. "Sergeant Lawson," he began, his voice firm, "the Marine Corps has many heroes, many leaders, many warriors. But few embody the spirit of resilience as you do. You turned ridicule into respect, scars into symbols, and doubt into legacy." He stepped forward and held out a commendation. "It is my honor to present you with the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for your service, your leadership, and your unwavering dedication to the values we hold sacred." As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Sarah felt the gravity of the moment. She thought of the girl who had once hidden her scars, ashamed. She thought of the jeers that once cut deeper than the scars themselves. And she thought of how far she had come, not despite her scars, but because of them. The room erupted in applause, but Sarah hardly heard it. What she heard instead were the echoes of every step, every struggle, every voice that had told her she couldn't. Those voices no longer stung. They had become fuel for a fire that would never go out. Her legacy grew beyond ceremonies and medals. Years later, Sarah was invited to help design mentorship programs for recruits who faced adversity, whether physical scars, disabilities, or hidden wounds. She became a guide for those who doubted their place in the Corps, telling them, "Your strength is not in being flawless. It's in standing tall, even when you're not." In time, recruits began calling her Ironheart, a nickname born, not of her scars, but of her spirit. The name spread quietly, a badge of respect whispered in barracks and training grounds. Sarah never claimed it, but she didn't need to. It lived in the Marines she inspired. Her journey came full circle one summer afternoon when she returned once more to Paris Island, not as a recruit, not as a speaker, but as a mentor. Walking the familiar grounds, she watched new recruits stumble through drills, faces red with exhaustion. She saw fear in their eyes, the same fear she had once carried. One recruit, a young woman with a birthmark across her face, caught her gaze. The girl looked away quickly, ashamed, trying to hide it under her cover. Sarah walked over, crouched down, and said softly, "You don't need to hide. The thing you're covering? That's not your weakness. It's your power, you'll see." The recruit's eyes widened, and for the first time, she stood a little straighter. Sarah recognized that spark. She knew it would grow. That day, as the sun set over the island, Sarah Lawson realized her scars were no longer just her story. They had become part of the Marine Corps itself, a lesson etched into its history, a legacy of resilience passed down through generations. Her life was proof that strength was not the absence of pain, but the will to rise above it. Proof that scars did not diminish honor, but deepened it. Proof that even in silence, respect could roar louder than words. And so, when future Marines marched, when they carried packs heavier than they thought they could bear, when they faced doubt and ridicule, they would remember Sergeant Sarah Lawson, They would remember the woman who had once been jeered for her scars, until a general stood in silent awe, because her story had never been about scars at all. It had always been about the courage to rise.